All right. So you're here because you, like me, can't resist a good cold case, you know?
Ted,
And especially one with a name as chilling as the Bra Murders.
the good one.
5 women murdered in Stamford, Connecticut between 1967 and 1971.
Right.
And to this day, the mystery remains.
It really does.
So today we're diving deep into the evidence, the suspects,
Yeah.
the twists and turns that left investigators baffled.
Yeah. It's a really interesting one, I think, for a lot of different reasons.
And more importantly, we're going to try to answer the question that's been hanging over this case for decades.
Okay.
Why was it never solved?
Hmm. That's a tough one.
Yeah,
There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and they don't all fit neatly together.
right.
We're going to have to examine each one carefully,
Yeah.
not just what happened, but how societal attitudes and the limitations of forensic science at the time might have impacted the investigation.
Exactly.
And, we didn't have DNA testing back then.
Right.
So that plays a big role in this case.
So let's start by laying out the facts. Between 1967 and 1971,
Okay.
5 women were found murdered in Stamford.
Right.
Their bodies all discovered within a disturbingly close radius along the Merritt Parkway.
Hmm.
Rose Ellen Posda, also known as Sissy Rush, Donna Roberts, Gloria Kahn, Gail Thompson, all in their 20s.
Yeah.
And then there's Alma T. Henry, a 34-year-old wife and mother of 4.
Right.
What makes her case stand out right away?
Well, the stark difference in her profile compared to the other victims. Most were involved in sex work or struggling with addiction lifestyles
Yeah.
that tragically often made them more vulnerable and overlooked by society.
Right.
But Alma Henry had a family, a
Right.
home, a life that didn't fit the pattern.
Exactly.
Her presence in this group of victims immediately muddies the waters.
Right.
It makes it harder to establish a clear motive or connection.
And that right there is one of the first hints that this case isn't as straightforward as it might seem.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, the Bra Murders moniker, it's a grim one, stemming from the fact that 3 of the victims, Roberts, Kahn, and Henry, were found strangled with their own bras.
Yeah.
All 5 women were strangled, and their bodies were discovered within a 400-meter radius of each other.
Okay.
Suggesting what exactly?
A chilling familiarity with the area on the part of the perpetrator.
All right.
This wasn't someone just passing through dumping bodies randomly.
Okay.
There's a sense of ownership,
Yeah.
a comfort level that's unsettling, to say the least.
Unsettling for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have these victims, this tight geographical cluster of the crime scenes.
Okay.
And now we get to the initial suspect, Benjamin Franklin Miller.
Right.
He wasn't just anyone.
Nope.
He was a self-proclaimed preacher,
Oh, really?
known for his religious zeal, particularly within the Black community of Stamford. He contacted the police himself, claiming to know the location of one of the victims' remains, Rose Posda.
Interesting.
What was his explanation for this supposed insider information?
Well, he claimed a mysterious phone call tipped him off. But as the investigation progressed, things took a bizarre turn.
Oh.
Miller, initially denying involvement, admitted to having had sexual contact with Gail Thompson, which, intriguingly, forensic evidence contradicted.
Oh, okay.
And then he offered up details about Thompson's murder that were not public knowledge.
Wow.
Information that only the killer could have known.
Those details are like a giant flashing neon sign, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a confession. It's a confession with insider knowledge.
Right.
So naturally, the police dig deeper and things escalate quickly.
Oh, boy.
Miller doesn't just confess to 1 murder. He confesses to 7.
7.
And even reenacts the crime scenes for the police.
Oh, wow.
You'd think open and shut case, right?
You would think so.
Good.
But this is where the complexities of the case and of Miller himself really come into focus.
Right.
We're not just dealing with a potential killer.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a man with a documented history of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia.
Okay.
So was this a genuine confession or a product of his mental state?
And let's not forget the societal context. This was the late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
During the civil rights era.
A very turbulent time.
The fact that most of the victims were Black women and the initial suspect was a white man immediately raised questions.
Of course.
Was there bias at play?
Right.
Was Miller an easy scapegoat?
It's possible.
Yeah.
The perception of bias, whether intentional or not, cannot be ignored.
Right.
The Black community in Stamford was vocal in their criticism of the police investigation,
Yeah.
feeling that the case was mishandled perhaps due to the victims' backgrounds. It added another layer of complexity to an already tangled case.
So we have a suspect who confesses but has a history of mental illness and a community that's already distrustful of the justice system.
Right.
What happens when this explosive mix goes to trial?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for disaster.
It is.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see. Well, as you might expect, the trial was anything but simple.
Yeah, it was pretty controversial.
Yeah. Miller recanted his confession, and his father testified that the police might have coerced him, taking advantage of his mental state. The court, wrestling with the validity of the confession and Miller's psychological condition, made a controversial decision. Acquittal by reason of insanity.
So he walked free.
So here you have a suspect who admitted to the crimes, even reenacted them, yet walks free. What does that tell you about the case?
It speaks to the limitations of the justice system, even with seemingly strong evidence.
Right.
The court recognized that Miller's confession might have been unreliable due to his schizophrenia and the possibility of coercion.
Right.
And remember, this was before the widespread awareness of false confessions and the psychological tactics that can lead to them.
It makes you wonder if in a different time, with more understanding of mental illness and the vulnerabilities it can create, the outcome might have been different.
It's possible.
But here's where the Bra murders takes another turn. While Miller was the focus, there was another figure lurking in the shadows. Robert Lupinacci, a Stamford resident with a documented history of violence against sex workers. In 1972, just a year after the last Bra Murders victim was found, he was arrested while attempting to strangle a black sex worker in the same area where some of the Bra Murders victims were found.
Oh, wow, in the same area.
Doesn't that send chills down your spine?
The timing and location are incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
It's almost too coincidental to dismiss.
Right.
And as investigators delved into Lupinacci's past, they uncovered connections to the Bra Murders victims.
Really?
He'd been seen near the crime scenes, had known some of the victims, and even frequented the same club as Alma Henry.
And then there's the evidence they found in his car, a Queen of Hearts playing card matching a deck found near Gail Thompson's body, but with the Queen of Hearts missing.
Interesting.
They also found female hair later determined to belong to a black woman. With all this pointing to Lupinacci, why wasn't he charged with the Bra murders?
It's a question that has haunted this case ever since. The focus on Miller and his subsequent acquittal seemed to overshadow the growing evidence against Lupinacci. You have to wonder if the investigation had already hit a dead end.
Right.
If the authorities were reluctant to admit they'd been looking in the wrong direction.
But the story doesn't end there. Miller's family, convinced of his innocence, launched their own investigation.
Wow.
They unearthed even more evidence linking Lupinacci to the murders, leading to a stunning development. A retrial for Miller in 1988.
Really a retrial.
The retrial, a testament to the unwavering belief of Miller's family, turned the case on its head. This time, the court ruled that Miller's confession was indeed coerced, a tragic miscarriage of justice.
Wow.
It highlighted the power dynamics at play, the vulnerability of individuals with mental illness within the legal system, and the potential for tunnel vision in investigations.
Right.
All charges against Miller were dropped, and he lived out the rest of his days in a shelter for the mentally ill, finally free from the shadow of accusation. Lupinacci, despite the mounting evidence, maintained his innocence.
Of course.
He was never charged with the Bra murders and died in 2013.
So we're left with a chilling realization. The legal system, despite its best intentions, is not infallible.
Wow.
In this case, one man was demonstrably innocent.
Right.
The other highly suspicious, but never convicted.
Right.
And the victims, their families, remain without the closure of knowing who is truly responsible.
It's a tragedy compounded by the lack of resolution now to understand why this case remains unsolved. I think we need to go beyond the facts and try to understand the minds of these men.
Okay.
Let's dive into the psychological profiles of both Miller and Lupinacci, exploring their motivations and behaviors.
Okay.
To see if we can shed some light on what might have driven these horrific acts.
All right, let's see what we can find.
Let's start with Miller. We know he was described as a religious fanatic, often preaching on street corners, particularly to black women.
Okay.
Could this have been more than just religious zeal? Was there something darker at play?
Well, some psychologists suggest that extreme religious fervor, especially when coupled with social isolation and a lack of personal fulfillment, can be a mask for deeper psychological issues.
Interesting.
In Miller's case, his preaching could have been a way to assert control, to gain a sense of authority and validation that he lacked elsewhere in his life.
And given his focus on black women during a time of heightened racial tensions, it's hard not to consider the potential role of power dynamics and racial bias.
Right.
What do you make of that connection?
It certainly adds another layer of complexity to a psychological profile.
Right.
Was this a way to exert control over a group that was already marginalized and facing societal pressures? It's a question we can't ignore even if we can't definitively answer it.
Okay, so we have this image of Miller mentally unstable, potentially seeking control and validation with a possible racial element to his fixations.
Right.
But how do we connect that to the murders his confession was deemed coerced? So can we truly say he was innocent?
It's a tricky situation.
Yeah.
While his confession might have been unreliable, it doesn't completely exonerate him.
Okay.
Remember, he provided specific details about Gail Thompson's murder that weren't public knowledge.
Right.
That suggests a level of insider information, even if he wasn't physically responsible for the killings.
So maybe he wasn't the killer, but he knew something, saw something, or perhaps was even involved in some peripheral way.
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought.
It is, and it leads us to a disturbing question.
What's that?
If Miller wasn't the primary perpetrator, was he manipulated or coerced by someone else? Was he a pawn in a larger, more sinister game?
Now that's a twist I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new set of possibilities. Okay, let's shift gears to Robert Lupinacci.
Okay.
We know he had a history of violence against sex workers, culminating in his arrest for attempted strangulation.
Right.
What does that tell us about his psychological makeup?
It suggests a pattern of predatory behavior targeting those he perceived as vulnerable and less likely to report crimes. He may have seen sex workers as easy targets, a way to act out his violent urges without fear of consequence.
And tragically, that perception was often reinforced by societal attitudes towards sex work at the time.
Right.
These women were often seen as disposable, their lives less valued, which could have emboldened someone like Lupinacci.
Absolutely. The social context is crucial here.
Yeah.
It created a climate of impunity where predators might have felt they could get away with these crimes.
Right.
And the fact that Lupinacci was never charged, despite the mounting evidence, raises questions about whether the investigation was truly thorough or if biases and assumptions influenced the pursuit of justice.
So we have two potential suspects, each with their own set of complexities and disturbing possibilities.
Right.
But let's not forget, there's still a mountain of physical evidence in this case.
Yeah.
What can we learn from the forensic details, and can they help us understand why this case was never solved?
That's a good question. Let's take a look.
So we've got that Queen of Hearts card linking Lupinacci to one of the victims, Gail Thompson. We've got the female hair they found in his car. And remember those chilling crime scenes all within such a tight radius along the Merritt Parkway?
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to some level of familiarity with the area, maybe even a sense of comfort in that location.
Right. It really does.
Does any of this point us towards a definitive answer, or does it just deepen the mystery?
Well, it certainly adds weight to the suspicion surrounding Lupinacci, but as we've seen throughout this deep dive, circumstantial evidence, while compelling, isn't always enough for a conviction.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with some of the pieces missing. You can see the general image.
Yeah.
But there are gaps that leave room for doubt.
And that doubt is what ultimately allowed both Miller and Lupinacci to escape accountability.
Yeah, unfortunately.
One acquitted, the other never even charged. But, you know, for me, the most haunting aspect of this case isn't just the unanswered questions.
Right.
It's the brutality of the crimes themselves. The strangulation, the use of the bras, the deliberate placement of the bodies, it's all so calculated, so chillingly personal.
Yeah, it really is.
Do those details tell us anything about the killer's psyche?
Well, you're right. The ritualistic element is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's often a hallmark of serial killers, a way to exert control, personalize the crimes,
Right.
and potentially even derive a twisted sense of satisfaction.
Right.
In this case, the use of the bras is particularly striking.
It suggests a very specific kind of rage, almost like a personal vendetta against these women.
It's possible. It could be sexually motivated, a form of degradation,
Right.
or even a symbolic act representing dominance and control.
Yeah.
Without a confession or further insights into the killer's motivations, we're left to speculate.
Of course.
But the ritual itself, the repetition, the meticulousness of it, it speaks volumes about the darkness lurking within the perpetrator's mind.
Okay, so we've explored the facts, the suspects, the evidence, and even tried to delve into the psychology of these men. But I have to admit, I'm still left with that nagging question. Why?
Yeah.
What could drive someone to commit such horrific acts? Is there even a satisfying answer to be found?
That's the ultimate mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
The why behind such senseless violence.
Right.
And unfortunately, in cases like this where we're dealing with limited information and the complexities of human behavior, a definitive answer may forever elude us.
But even without a neat and tidy explanation, I think there are valuable lessons to be gleaned from this deep dive.
Oh, for sure.
What stands out to you looking back at this tangled web of evidence and speculation?
Well, for me, it's a stark reminder that justice isn't always served, that the truth can be elusive, and that sometimes the most we can hope for is to learn from the past.
Oh, yeah.
The Bra Murders case highlights the importance of thorough investigations, the dangers of tunnel vision, and the need to constantly challenge our own assumptions and biases.
It also reminds us that behind the headlines and the sensationalism, there are real victims, real families whose lives are forever shattered by these acts of violence.
Yeah.
We can't forget their stories, their pain, their enduring quest for answers.
And for you, the listener, the challenge is to grapple with the ambiguity, to weigh the evidence,
Right.
and to draw your own conclusions.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about engaging with the material, thinking critically, and recognizing that the pursuit of truth is an ongoing process.
Maybe one day new evidence will emerge or advancements in forensic technology will shed new light on the Bra murders.
It's possible.
But until then, we're left with the haunting reality of a cold case, a community forever marked by tragedy and the unsettling knowledge that sometimes the darkest secrets remain hidden.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Bra murders.
Yeah.
We hope it's prompted you to think deeply, to question assumptions, and to keep searching for the truth, no matter how elusive it may seem.
And remember, if you have any thoughts or theories about this case, we'd love to hear from you. Stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, stay safe.